All right, we are ready to begin. The room is live and the trial may begin. Judge Orange, can you unmute your video so the attorneys can see you? All right, thank you, everybody.
Can we start? I guess that's
Yes.
All right, great. Do we have any pretrial matters or housekeeping matters before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to make appearances?
Absolutely.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Ilana Goldberg, and today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Leo Mondani.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We'll be representing the plaintiff in today's case, Mr. Stephen Rogers.
Good morning, Mr. Rogers.
Good morning.
Appearances for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning from Central Time and from wherever you're joining us. I'm Brandon Cooper. I'm joined by my co-counsel today, Mr. Raul Garcia.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Mr. Drew Mars, who is the defendant in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Mr. Mars. All right, appearances having been made, what do we have to take care of before we can get started with the trial?
From the plaintiff, there are just a few housekeeping matters, Your Honor. First, as this trial will be taking place online, of course, we just ask that if at any point you can't see or hear us, you interrupt us and let us know so that we can fix the technical issue.
All right.
And next, if I could direct Your Honor's attention to the legal documents that you should have received before today's trial.
Let me try and find those. Bear with me.
Of course, Your Honor.
While I'm looking for the email or whatever it is that has these things, let me ask you this, is it possible for you to share your screen with me and point them out to me? Or do I actually look for the email that has these things?
Ms. Goldberg, I can share my screen, so.
All right, so if we could go to page 2, Mr. Mondani. I see we're there. Oh, we're already there. So just briefly, for the pretrial rulings, number 16 states that exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted and can be used at any point during trial, and that includes opening statements. And
Okay.
then if we could go to number 24 of the stipulations.
All right.
So, Your Honor, the matter at hand in today's trial is a matter of inheritance, and the stipulation is just about the amount of that inheritance, which in cash is about $20 million, and in other assets is up to $25 million.
Okay.
And that's all from the legal documents from the plaintiff today.
Okay.
And before we begin, we'd also just like to invoke Rules 603 and 615 of the Midlands Rules of Evidence. Those are the constructive swearing in of all witnesses, and then the constructive sequestration of all witnesses barring party representatives. Our party representative today is the plaintiff, Stephen Rogers.
Any objection to that from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor. I will just like to inform the court that our party representative will be Mr. Drew Mars.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That's a go. Anything else?
With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Goldberg. What do we have from the defense?
Just one more housekeeping matter, Your Honor. Whenever we make an objection and it is sustained, should we motion to strike or should we assume that testimony has already been stricken?
If you want it stricken, you've got to move to strike it, and you've got to point out exactly what you want me to strike.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay. Let me just say this, just for future reference in the further proceedings, if there is any document that you want me to take a look at, please share the screen, because if you have to wait for me to click the link and find the document and flip through the pages and all that, we'll be here forever. So feel free to just go on and share the screen with me so that I can see it. All right.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
For all evidence we're entering, we can put that on the screen. And if we're ever using depositions or affidavits for impeachment purposes, generally the judge does not have to see those as long as the witness and the attorney corroborate what's on the document.
Okay. But if it gets to a conflict where there's some issue as to what's on the document, put it on the screen so I can see it. And also be ready just in case I ask you to put it on the screen so I can see it, because I might be curious. So I'd appreciate that.
Of course, Your Honor.
All right. So opening statements for the plaintiff.
May I proceed?
Of course.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. The pills, the prints, the payoff. On the morning of August 15th, 2018, Stephen Rogers woke up to the news that his beloved grandmother had passed away. This was Mr. Rogers' grandmother, Agatha Lee. She was 82 years old. She was a brilliant novelist. And today you'll learn that she was killed by her caretaker, the defendant, Drew Mars. The defendant was someone Miss Lee trusted. He had worked for Miss Lee for 10 years, lived in Miss Lee's house, become like family to Miss Lee. But the defendant abused that trust. Today you will learn that the day before Miss Lee died, the defendant snuck into her room, opened her pill organizer, and replaced Miss Lee's nightly arthritis medication with an identical set of pills that Miss Lee was deathly allergic to. You'll learn that the defendant then put the arthritis medication back in its original bottle, leaving his fingerprints on the pills he had replaced and leaving Miss Lee clueless to the fact that the pills she took that night would kill her. And you'll learn why the defendant would swap those pills. Because when Miss Lee took those pills and died, the defendant got his payoff. Miss Lee's entire estate, valued at $20 million. The pills, the prints, the payoff. And that's why my client, Mr. Rogers, is suing the defendant. Here in the state of Midlands, we have something called the Slayer statute. And that statute says that if the defendant killed Miss Lee, if the defendant knowingly caused Miss Lee's death, then he is not entitled to any of Miss Lee's money. And in order for that statute to go into effect, we have to prove that the defendant killed Miss Lee by what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. So today we're going to do that. And we're specifically going to do that by pointing you towards 3 pieces of evidence: the pills, the prints, and the payoff. First, the pills. You'll learn today that after Miss Lee died, the defendants found a drug called chloroandramine in her system. You learn that chloroandramine was an over-the-counter drug that Miss Lee was deathly allergic to, and that in pill form, it looks identical to the arthritis medication that Miss Lee took every night. So, in order to kill Miss Lee, we'll prove that all someone would have to do would be to access her pill organizer and swap out that arthritis medication for its deadly alternative. But how do we know that person was the defendant? That's the prints. Because today you'll learn that the detectives in this case found the defendant's fingerprints in 2 important locations. First, on a bag in the defendant's closet that had that deadly pill chloroandramine inside of it. And second, on 2 pills of that arthritis medication that you learned had been touched and then placed back in their original container. And that'll bring us to the final factor for today, the payoff. Because today you'll learn that the morning before she died, Miss Lee actually promised that her estate would go to her grandson and not the defendant. You'll learn that the defendant overheard Miss Lee planning to change her will, even overheard Miss Lee setting up an appointment with a lawyer for later that week. So we'll prove that in order for the defendant to receive $20 million, it wasn't enough to wait for Miss Lee to die. We'll prove that the defendant had to kill Miss Lee as soon as possible. The pills, the prints, the payoff. Members of the jury, today, we can't bring back Miss Lee. We can't bring back a literary genius. We can't bring back a generous and trusting woman. We can't bring back Mr. Rogers' grandmother. But what we can do is make sure that the person who killed Miss Lee does not get to profit from her death. And to do that, all we ask of you, members of the jury, is that you follow the facts and that you listen for the pills, the prints, and the payoff. And at the end of today's trial, my colleague, Mr. Mondani, will ask you to find in favor of the plaintiff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Defense.
Opening statements, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
May I begin?
Of course.
Members of the jury, Miss Goldberg just came up here and she told you a story. She told you all of the facts that she wants you to know for today's case. But members of the jury, the story Miss Goldberg just told you, it isn't the whole story. So let me tell you the rest. You see, what Miss Goldberg didn't tell you was that there's someone else in this case who needed money. Somebody else in this case who was living in the same house, who knew about Miss Lee's allergies, someone in this case who knew that she could die if she was given chloroadramine pills. Members of the jury, that person is the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers. But you see, there's one important difference between the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers, and Drew Mars. You see, Drew Mars's name was actually on Miss Lee's will, and the plaintiff was not. Folks, that's why we're here today. Now, it may have sounded like it from Miss Goldberg's argument just now, Miss Goldberg's opening statement, that this is a murder trial. I just want to be clear. This is not a criminal case. This is a civil suit, a case about money. Money that Drew Mars had because Drew Mars's name was actually on that will. Money that the plaintiff thought was rightfully his. Now, there aren't many ways to make a will invalid, but the plaintiff knew of a few. You see, you're going to learn today that the plaintiff, he's been to law school. And in law school, he learned about something called the Slayer statute. Now, what that means is that if someone who's on Miss Lee's will was actually found to be responsible for her death, that means that Stevie Rogers would inherit everything. Her house, her car, her money, everything. And the plaintiff knew that. The plaintiff knew that if Miss Lee were to die, And he could somehow convince a jury that it was Drew Mars who had caused her death. Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff, would inherit everything. Members of the jury, this case is about a person named Stevie Rogers who knew what the will said and he knew how to stop it. You see, there's a reason why Drew Mars's name was on that will. You're going to hear about Stevie Rogers today, and you're going to hear that he didn't have a lot of money. He started out with a trust fund in 2008, and over 10 years, it began to run out. And when it finally did, he decided he'd visit his grandmother, a person with a lot of money. You're going to hear that Stevie Rogers, in this case, the plaintiff, he chose to visit his grandmother on July 4th, just as his money had run out. And when he visited Miss Lee, he learned about the will. But you're going to learn today that he also knew how to stop it, members of the jury. You see, Stevie Rogers, he had never visited his grandmother over 7 years. He had never called, he had never written, he had never seen her. But when his money was out, he knew it was time to see his grandmother. And you're going to hear today about comments Miss Lee said. You're going to learn that Miss Lee had in fact knew about that. Miss Lee, in fact, predicted that he was there just to get her money. And when Mr. Rogers, the plaintiff, visited Miss Lee, that's when he learned about the will. That's when the plaintiff learned that he wasn't on that will. But the plaintiff knew how to stop it. You see, just after a month after Stevie Rogers had visited Miss Lee, and he learned that Miss Lee wouldn't change her will at all, she wouldn't put Stevie Rogers on that will, the plaintiff knew that if he could somehow convince a jury to believe that it was Drew Mars who had killed her, Stevie Rogers would inherit everything. And that's why we're here. Because the plaintiff knew about the will and he knew how to stop it, members of the jury. You see, though Drew Mars was her nurse, it was actually Stevie Rogers who knew about an allergy she had. It was Stevie Rogers who knew where he could find it. It was Stevie Rogers' name who was not on that will. And when Stevie Rogers found out that he wasn't on that will, he knew there was one way he could put his name back on that will and inherit everything Miss Lee owned. And that was by framing Drew Mars. Members of the jury, that's why we're here today. You see, you're going to learn today that it was Stevie Rogers who would inherit nothing. You're going to learn today that it was Stevie Rogers who knew about her allergy. Members of the jury, you're going to learn that Stevie Rogers had access to her room on the day that she died. Drew Mars couldn't benefit from this at all, members of the jury. You're going to hear today that it was Stevie Rogers who could benefit by framing Drew Mars, and that's exactly what you're going to hear today that he did, members of the jury. Now, at the end of today's case, my co-counsel, Mr. Cooper, he's going to come before you, and he's going to tell you that everything you hear today to question whether or not you are actually going to hear any evidence about Drew Mars exchanging the pills, whether or not anyone even saw Drew Mars doing that, whether there's any evidence at all that he actually exchanged the pills with poison. But what you are going to hear, members of the jury, is that it was Stevie Rogers who was running out of money, who was running out of time. Members of the jury, you're going to hear that it was Stevie Rogers who knew about the will and he knew how to stop it. Members of the jury. It's for these reasons that we're going to ask you today to not find Drew Mars liable. because you're going to hear there's only one person who could benefit from this case. There's only one person who actually had access to her room, the pills, and everything that would cause her to die. And that person who could benefit from her death, Stevie Rogers. Because it was Stevie Rogers who knew about her will. And it was Stevie Rogers who knew how to stop it, members of the jury. That's why at the end of today's case, we're going to ask you to find Drew Mars not liable for her death. Thank you.
Oops, got to unmute myself. All right, thank you so much, defense. Let's have the plaintiff put their first witness on.
Your Honor, at this point, the plaintiff calls Mr. Stephen Rogers.
All right, Mr. Rogers, we'll assume that you've taken the stand somewhere. Please begin when ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. I'm Stephen Rogers.
And sir, how old are you?
I just turned 33 in July.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a writer. I work mostly in nonfiction and historical fiction.
I want to talk about why you're here today. Mr. Mondani, could we get Exhibit 1, please? Who is the person in this photograph?
That's my grandmother, Agatha Lee.
What was your grandmother like?
Well, for the last 10 years, Nana was the only family that I had. She was warm, generous, loved to have fun, but she was also eccentric. She wrote one best-selling novel, and then she pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth. She didn't always like to spend time with people, but she always made time for me.
Why was Agatha Lee your only family?
My parents died in a car accident in 2008, a drunk driver. Nana and I were home together when we got the news.
So then I want to talk about your relationship with your grandmother. When was the last time that you saw her?
Well, I was staying with her from July 4th of 2018 up until she passed.
All right, now I want to talk about someone else involved in today's case. Do you know the defendant?
Yeah, he was Nana's caretaker and live-in nurse.
Do you know what exactly the defendant did for your grandmother?
Yeah, he would cook meals sometimes, clean up after Nana, and prepare her pills every week.
What, if anything, do you know about the relationship between the defendant and your grandmother?
She treated him like family. She'd help him make dinner, bring him a cup of tea when he was reading. They were close.
So do you have Exhibit 9 in front of you?
I do.
What is that exhibit?
It's a copy of Nana's will from 2018.
Does it look like a fair and accurate copy of that will?
Yeah.
Does it look like it's been changed in any way since you last saw it?
No.
All right. The plaintiff enters Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Without objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 9 will be received.
Now, sir, could you please read the first 2 lines of Article 2 for the jury?
Yeah, sure. I leave my entire estate, including all real and personal property, including future royalties from my book, Death in a Bottle, to my devoted and beloved caretaker, Drew Mars.
How did it make you feel to hear that?
It was a wake-up call for me. I'd gotten distant from Nana after my parents died. I guess I'd been trying to get as far away as I could. You know, I filled my days with travel, new projects, anything to take my mind off of what happened. But with the 10th anniversary of my parents' death coming up, I had to see her.
And how would you describe your relationship with your grandmother that summer when you went to see her?
I felt like I was a kid again. Nana and I would spend entire days, watching movies, playing board games. I even took her to the zoo once. Nana and I started to grow apart after the accident, but being back together, it felt like we were best friends again.
In that summer, did you have any kind of relationship with the defendant?
Well, while I was staying with Nana, we lived in the same house, but that was about it. I would try to talk to him, have a conversation, but it was always tense.
What do you mean it was tense?
Well, he was always asking me when I was leaving. He would never let me and Nana have a minute alone together. Anytime we'd try to have a private conversation, he'd find a way to butt in.
Did the defendant ever tell you anything about your grandmother's health?
Yeah, it was kind of strange. We were sitting there kind of talking, and Drew all of a sudden just goes, Agatha has a fatal allergy to chlorandramine, right? Even just one pill could kill her. I didn't know why he said that.
While you're with her, was your grandmother on any kind of medication that you know of?
Yeah, I saw Drew put pills into a pill organizer for her every week. She kept it right next to her bedside table, and she'd take them before she went to bed.
And in the weeks before her death, did you notice that anything seemed to be wrong with your grandmother's health?
No, nothing.
So, sir, when was the first time that you found out something was wrong?
It was August 15th. Drew woke me up, pounding on my door. He said he couldn't get Nana awake.
What did you do?
I went with him to Nana's room, and that's when I saw her. She'd always been this larger than life figure, but seeing her on that bed, she looked so small, so frail.
Sir, were you able to wake her up?
No.
I'd like to talk about why that might have happened. You told us earlier that the defendant was set to inherit all of your grandmother's money. Was there ever any indication that that might change?
Yes. Yeah, the day before she died, Nana, she called me into her study. She said that she was so glad to have me home and that she had changed her mind about the will.
What exactly did she tell you?
Well, she said that she was planning to make me her heir again, and Drew wouldn't get anything.
And what happened after that conversation that you had with your grandmother?
Well, as soon as we walked out of the study, there was Drew. He was standing right outside the door. I almost ran into him when I walked out.
Did the defendant say anything to you when that happened?
Sort of. He mouthed some words at me. It looked like he said, "No way."
And at any point after that conversation, did you see the defendant go to your grandmother's bedroom?
I think so. Later that night, after Nana had gone to bed, I saw Drew tiptoeing from his room over to Nana's.
Did you notice anything about the defendant's appearance at that point?
Yeah, it looked like he was carrying something in his hand.
So after you saw the defendant tiptoeing towards your grandmother's room, maybe carrying something, did you ever see your grandmother alive again?
No.
Now, you said that your grandmother had planned to change her will. Do you know if she had changed her will before she died?
No. She said that she was going to, and then the next morning she was dead.
So, sir, when your grandmother died, who was set to inherit all of her money?
Drew Mars.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Rogers. Nothing further.
Cross-examination, Your Honor. May I begin?
I believe you're muted, Your Honor.
I was saying, give me 1 second. Let me type a note or two.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense, cross-examination, please.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers, I want to begin by talking about why you're here. Now, from 2008 until 2018, you didn't have a full-time job, did you?
No, that's true. Like I said, I'm a writer.
You were living off of a trust fund that your parents had left. Is that right?
That's right. After they passed, they left me some money to take care of myself.
To be specific, they left you $2 million in 2008. Isn't that true?
That's right. I used that for everything, living expenses, school, that kind of thing.
But in 2018, your trust fund began to run out. Isn't that true, Mr. Rogers?
I mean, like I said, I was using it for everything. It was always going down.
So by February of 2018, your $2 million had gone down to just 12,000. Isn't that true?
Something like that. Yeah. I had some assets, a couple books in the works, but yeah, that's right.
But you knew your grandmother. She had money, right?
She did.
And you knew that she had written a will. Isn't that true?
Yeah, after my parents died.
Well, I want to talk about that will. Mr. Cooper, could we get Exhibit 4 up on the screen, please? That's the will that you had learned about. Is that right? Well, Mr. Cooper, Exhibit 9.
Yeah, that was one of her wills. Yeah.
Sir, that will, it didn't have your name on it, did it?
No, that's right.
It had Drew Mars's name on it. Isn't that true?
That's true.
Well, sir, I want to talk about what's on that will. Mr. Cooper, could we get Exhibit 4 up on the screen? Now, Mr. Rogers, that's your grandmother's house, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, if you were on her will, you'd get that house. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's right.
On top of that house, you'd get her car. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
And on top of that car, you'd get $20 million in cash. Isn't that true?
That's right. Yeah.
But in 2018, well, sir, you found out that you weren't going to be on that will. Isn't that true?
That's right. Nana wrote me a letter.
She told you in that letter that she was going to take you out of her will. Isn't that true?
Yeah. She said that at that point, it didn't feel like we were family anymore. And I mean, that broke my heart.
But sir, that's a yes to my question, that she told her she was going to take you out of her will. Is that right?
That's right.
So I want to talk about what you did after that. Now, you hired a private investigator. Is that right?
To help me find her. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't seen her in a couple of years.
You paid that private investigator $10,000 just to find her. Isn't that true?
Yeah. The 10th anniversary of my parents' death was coming out, and I didn't want Nana to be alone. I didn't want to be alone either.
But sir, that's a yes to my question, that you paid that investigator $10,000 just to find her. Isn't that true?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to see my grandma.
So by the time you arrived to your house, well, that $12,000 had gone down to just $2,000. Isn't that true?
In the trust fund. Yeah.
But you knew there were still ways you could inherit Miss Lee's money, right?
What do you mean?
Well, she could change her will. Isn't that true?
Yeah. And she tried to.
Objection, Your Honor, under 701, may I be heard? Your Honor, this is a lay witness. He's not an attorney. He's not been qualified as any kind of expert. To ask him to talk about how a will could be changed or might be different is beyond the scope of his knowledge.
Response, Your Honor? Your Honor, may I respond? Your Honor, we're not asking for this witness's objective knowledge as an expert. Under 701, we're allowed to ask this witness what his opinions are, what his understanding is as to the law. And we only care about his understanding because it's that understanding that motivated his actions, and that's what we're trying to prove today. We're not here to ask him any legal expertise. We're just here to ask him what he understood about Miss Lee's will.
The objection will be overruled with the caveat that the court takes the witness's answer as being his understanding of what was possible.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I continue?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
But you knew that there were still ways you could inherit Miss Lee's money. Isn't that true?
Like you said, yeah, she could have changed the will.
But before you showed up to her house, sir, you hadn't visited her in 7 years. Isn't that true?
That's right. Like I said, after my parents died, it was hard for me to see her. She looked just like my mom. Everything she did reminded me of her.
Sir, that wasn't what I asked you. What I asked you is that before you showed up to her house, you hadn't visited her in 7 years. Is that right?
That's yeah, not in person. Yeah.
You hadn't written to her, have you?
No, I called her sometimes. She called me, but
Sir, you say you called her sometimes. Isn't it true that in 7 years you only called her once?
yeah, like I said, she would usually call me.
But you knew that there was another way that you could inherit Miss Lee's money, didn't you?
Like you said, she could change the will.
Well, sir, there was another way called the Slayer's statute. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
In fact, you actually studied that rule in law school, didn't you?
Not that I remember.
Sir, are you telling us that you did not study that rule in law school?
No, I mean I'd heard of it.
And what you understood that rule to mean is that if Drew Mars was found to have killed Miss Lee, you could sue him for everything. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean they told me it says that if you kill someone, you shouldn't be able to get their money.
And so that means that if Drew Mars, who's on that will, and that will was no longer valid, well, that means that you would get everything that's on her will. Isn't that
Objection,
true?
Your Honor, once again under 701. The prior questions were stated as Mr. Rogers' understanding, but that question was stated specifically as a matter of fact, and we believe that goes beyond the scope of his knowledge.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
I believe I specifically asked this witness what that he understood that rule to mean when he had learned it in law school. If opposing counsel would like, I can clarify that question, but that's what I understood my question to mean.
Why don't you rephrase the wording of your very last question so that it
Sure.
what his understanding was as opposed to what he knew? I'll sustain the objection. Please continue.
Motion to strike the question, Your Honor.
No, I won't strike a question. The question isn't evidence. And I wouldn't strike the answer either because my understanding is that counsel is going to clarify it and we'll be basically in the same place that we are now. If that doesn't happen, please renew your objection. And then
Yes.
Mr. Rogers, right now I just want to talk about what your understanding was. Now, your understanding of the Slayer statute means that if Drew Mars was found to have killed Miss Lee, you could sue him for everything. Isn't that true?
I mean, yeah, my understanding was that if you kill someone, you can't take their money.
Well, sir, not just that, but that would mean that Drew Mars would not inherit anything, but you would. Isn't that true?
That's right. I was Nana's only living family.
So let's talk about the circumstances surrounding Miss Lee's death. Now, her body was found on August 15th. Is that right?
Yeah, that's when Drew came and got me.
You knew that she had died from an allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine. Is that right?
I didn't know at the time. I know that now.
Well, sir, I want to talk about what you knew about chloroandramine, sir. You know where you could find that drug. Isn't that true?
Drew told me he could get it at a pharmacy.
And so because of what you have learned, that means that you also knew that you could buy it from a pharmacy. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's what Drew said.
You had access to Miss Lee's room. Isn't that true?
I mean, I lived in the house.
Sir, what I asked you is that you had access to Miss Lee's room. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, she locked it sometimes, but when it wasn't locked, I guess.
And sir, when her body was found, the first thing you told them to do was to run a toxicology screen. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, a toxicology screen, an autopsy, anything they could do to find out what happened.
Well, sir, you would agree with me that you didn't want them to run a toxicology screen so you could find out what happened, right?
No, I wanted to find out what happened to my grandma.
Sir, you would agree with me that the only reason that you wanted that toxicology screen was that so you could prove that Drew Mars had murdered her. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to find out what happened. I wanted to know what happened to my grandma.
Mr. Rogers, the question that I asked you is that the only reason you wanted them to run a toxicology screen was to prove that Drew Mars had done it. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought that he'd killed my grandma. I wanted to know what happened.
Now, Mr. Rogers, I'd like to talk about what that autopsy report showed. Now, you're aware that the medical examiner had found that Miss Lee had died from ingesting chloroandramine. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, Miss Lee, she actually had a rare chloroandramine allergy, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
You knew about that allergy, didn't you?
Yeah, like I said, Drew told me about it.
Well, not only did you know about that allergy that Miss Lee had, you actually knew where to find it, didn't you?
Sorry, where to find what?
Where to find chloroandramine.
Oh, yeah, like I said, Drew told me he could get it at the pharmacy.
And so because of what Drew Mars had told you, that means that you also knew where you could find it, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Drew said he could get it at a pharmacy.
And so I want to talk about August 14th, the day before she died. Now, you were home alone for parts of that day, weren't you?
Yeah, when Nana went out to lunch.
And because you were home alone, you had access to her room, didn't you?
I don't know if it was locked. I didn't go in there. I don't know.
Well, sir, you could have went inside her room. Isn't that true?
Like I said, I don't know if her room was locked. I didn't go in there.
Well, sir, because you could have walked into her room at any point. You had access to her pill container, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to attorney testifying. May I be heard?
Sustain.
My client has clearly stated that he did not know if he had access to.
Sustain.
Oh, yes, Your Honor. Motion to strike.
Strike what?
I suppose it was just a question, Your Honor. We can move on.
Continue.
Sir, I want to talk about what happened on the day that Miss Lee died. Sir, that day the police arrived to your house. Is that right? On Miss Lee's house?
Yeah, that's right.
And when they arrived to Miss Lee's house, they claimed that she had died of natural causes. Is that right?
That's what they thought at first, but then they realized that wasn't true.
Well, sir, not only did they realize it, sir, you had in fact knew that she was poisoned, right?
I thought she was, yeah. I mean, the day before she told me she was going to change the will, and then the next morning she's dead. I was suspicious.
Well, sir, not only were you suspicious about how she had died, you predicted that she had died from poison. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing on her body, no other signs.
And what you asked the police to do was to file or to run a toxicology screen on Miss Lee, right?
Like I said, yeah, a toxicology screen. I asked for an autopsy. I asked for anything they could do.
Well, sir, before you had even learned about the results of that toxicology screen or that autopsy, you chose to file a lawsuit against Drew Mars. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought that he had killed my grandma. I still do.
Sir, before you had even learned how she had died, the only person you chose to accuse was the person on Miss Lee's will. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Drew was the only one who would have lost everything as soon as she changed the will.
Well, sir, I'm not asking who would have lost anything. I'm talking about who was on her will. The only person that you accused was the person on her will. Isn't that true?
Yeah, because he would have lost everything when she changed it.
Is that a yes to my question, Mr. Rogers? That's the only person you accused, the only person on her will?
Yeah, that's right.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
All right. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. We just ask that Mr. Rogers be excused.
All right, Mr. Rogers, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Plaintiff have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. If you're ready, we call Mr. Bond to the stand, the virtual stand.
Mr. Bond, thank you. You may question when ready.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Sure. Hi, my name is Marcus Bond.
Where are you calling in from, Mr. Bond?
Well, I'm in the Midwest right now at home. I'm working out of my basement until the pandemic's over.
What do you do for a living, sir?
Well, I'm what's called a consultant. Essentially, I offer private investigative services where people can call and hire me to run an investigation that runs parallel to the one the police are running.
How'd you get involved in that line of work?
Well, I got my start in investigative journalism, actually, covering police investigations and police misconduct. But after some time doing that, I decided I wanted to get my hands dirty trying to fix the problem instead. By that point, I was too old to go to the police academy, so I got my certification as a private investigator, and I started my own consulting firm.
Sir, over the course of your career, how many of those independent investigations have you conducted?
Probably hundreds.
So let's talk about how you got involved in today's case. How was that?
Well, I was hired by Stephen Rogers to look into the circumstances around the death of his grandmother, a woman named Agatha Lee. I also recommended that the police arrest Drew Mars, Miss Lee's caretaker, for her murder.
Mr. Bond, what was your role exactly in that investigation?
Well, obviously, I left a lot of the evidence handling to the police. I did collect some of the evidence myself, and I was there for most of the police's investigation. I also reviewed the police report, which detailed their entire investigation, as well as their forensic findings.
Mr. Bond, what, if any, evidence did you rely on for your recommendation to the police?
Three main pieces of evidence. We found evidence of a financial connection between Mr. Mars and Miss Lee, pills that we discovered were what had caused Miss Lee's death, as well as fingerprints from the defendant on a bag where we had found those pills had been stored.
Okay, so let's take those one at a time, starting with that financial connection.
Sure.
What'd you find there?
Well, there we started with finding out that Drew Mars was actually listed as the beneficiary on Miss Lee's will.
Do you know if the defendant was aware that he was going to receive all of Miss Lee's estate?
I do, actually. We found an email where Mr. Mars was discussing that inheritance.
Would you recognize that email if I showed it to you?
I would.
Do you have Exhibit 13 in front of you, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
Could you please identify Exhibit 13?
This looks like that email.
Is it a fair and accurate picture of that email?
Yes, sir, it is.
At this point, we offer Exhibit 13 into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
I'll take a look at Exhibit 13. You want to screen?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Goldberg, could you pull up Exhibit 13? There it is. Now, Mr. Bond, when was this email sent?
This was sent on February 1st, 2018. So just about 6 months before Miss Lee passed away.
And could you please read from the third sentence to the end of this email?
Hold on just 1 second. The email will be admitted. All right, now you can read it.
Yes, Your Honor.
It says, but Agatha showed me a will that is dated today, saying Stevie, the no good grandkid, is out, and I get everything. The house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life.
Sir, are you aware of any changes to that financial connection during the month of August of 2018?
Well, I was aware of a potential change. When I interviewed Mr. Rogers, he told me about a conversation he says he had with his grandmother on August 14th, where Miss Lee said that she was going to change her will and make him the beneficiary instead. Mr. Rogers said that immediately after that conversation, they had seen Miss Mars right outside of the doors of the room where they were talking.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay to the statements of Mr. Rogers.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. Rogers has already testified in today's case, so therefore these statements by Mr. Bond are not hearsay. They are allowed under 801 D1B. They are prior consistent statements that Mr. Bond is corroborating now.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. These statements are the ones that Mr. Bond heard while he was interviewing Mr. Rogers and are not necessarily the same statements Mr. Bond told us on examination earlier in trial.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Your Honor, motion to strike the testimony from Mr. Bond?
I'll strike it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Bond, you said that this conversation took place on August 14th. What day was Ms. Lee reported dead?
That was August 15th.
All right, then. So let's talk about the second piece of evidence you mentioned, those pills. Where'd you start there?
We started there by looking at Miss Lee's autopsy.
Would you recognize that autopsy?
I would, yes.
And Ms. Goldberg, could we get Exhibit 2 on display? Your Honor, it's already been entered into evidence pursuant to pretrial order 16. And Mr. Bond, what does this autopsy say about how Ms. Lee died?
Well, this autopsy says that the cause of death was an allergic reaction to 2 pills of a drug called chloroandramine.
Do you know if chloroandramine is deadly?
Not typically, no, but the medical history here says that Miss Lee actually had a rare allergy to that drug, chloroandramine, and that any quantity of it could be fatal for her.
Well, I want to talk about how those pills might have gotten into Ms. Lee's system.
Sure.
Are you familiar with Exhibit 17?
Yes, sir, I am.
And do you have it in front of you?
I do.
Could you describe what Exhibit 17 shows?
Yes, this is a pill bottle that we recovered from Miss Mars's bedroom.
And is it an accurate photograph of that pill bottle?
Yes, sir, it is.
At this time, Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 17.
No objections, Your Honor.
Exhibit 17 will be received.
Ms. Goldberg, could you pull up Exhibit 17? Thank you. Now, Mr. Bond, was it ever determined what pills were inside of this bottle?
It was. The lab testing determined that the pills in this bottle were chloroandramine, the same drug that Miss Lee had died from.
Now, I know it's a little hard to see through the orange bottle, but could you please describe the physical characteristics of chloroandramine pills?
Sure. So these pills are small, they're purple, and they're shaped like capsules.
Did you recover any other small purple pills shaped like capsules in Ms. Lee's house?
We actually did, sir. We found a pill sorter on Miss Lee's bedside table that had a number of small purple pills in it.
Was it determined what the pills inside of that pill sorter were?
It was. Lab testing said that those were an arthritis medication. But when we looked at those two side by side, the arthritis medication and the chloroandramine, we actually saw that they were visually identical.
So now let's talk about that third piece of evidence you mentioned, the prints. Where did you begin that part of your investigation?
Well, at this point, we were considering the possibility that someone had taken some of Miss Lee's arthritis medication and swapped it out for some of the identical looking chloroandramine. So we were looking for any evidence about who might have done that.
Well, earlier you mentioned that those chloroandramine pills were found in Drew Mars's bedroom. Where specifically did you find them?
We found those in a bag in Mr. Mars's closet.
Would you recognize that bag if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Do you have Exhibit 15 in front of you?
I do, yes.
Could you please identify it?
This is that bag where we found the chloroandramine.
And it is an accurate photograph of that bag?
Looks like it to me.
At this point, Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 15.
No objections, Your Honor.
You got a picture of it?
Yes, Your Honor. We'll put it up right now. Now, Mr. Bond, what did you do after you found this bag with the chloroandramine pills inside of it in Drew Mars's closet?
Just a second. Do you want a ruling on whether it's been admitted?
Yes, certainly, before we move on.
Okay, yeah, it's been admitted. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Bond, could you tell us what you did after you found this bag?
Well, the police ran fingerprint tests on all of the evidence we found. That included the bottle of the arthritis medication, the bottle of chloroandramine, the pills in both of those bottles, as well as this bag where we had found the chloroandramine.
Okay, so let's take those one at a time. Did you find any fingerprints on either of the bottles themselves?
No usable prints from the bottle, sir, but they did show smudges that were consistent with recent handling.
What about the pills inside of those bottles?
We actually did find prints there. Most of the pills didn't have any usable prints on them, but we did find some fingerprints on some of the arthritis medication.
Sir, exactly how many chloroangimin pills were found in Ms. Lee's system?
2, sir.
And exactly how many of those arthritis medication pills had fingerprints on them?
2.
Were the police able to determine a match for those fingerprints?
Yes, sir. Those fingerprints were found to be a match to Drew Mars.
What about that bag with the chloroangimin pills inside of it? Any fingerprints there?
Yes, sir. We did find one fingerprint on the zipper of that bag.
Could you please point on this picture where that fingerprint was?
Sure. So if you look down in the bottom left there, you see the little metallic looking thing. That's the zipper, and that's where we found that one fingerprint.
And whose fingerprint was that?
Drew Mars.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Nothing further at this point, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Bond, can you see and hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Now, I want to start by talking about Mr. Rogers. Now, August the 15th wasn't the first time you had met him, right?
That's correct, sir. He had actually hired me before.
He hired you months earlier, right?
That's right.
That was to track down Agatha Lee, correct?
That's exactly right, sir.
He wanted you to find her address and give it to him, right?
Yes.
He paid you $10,000 to do that, didn't he?
That's right.
And he told you why he was spending all that money, didn't he?
Yes, sir. He said he wanted to find where his grandmother was, and he also showed me a letter.
Exactly. And would you recognize that letter if I were to show it to you today in court?
I would, yes.
Mr. Garcia, if we could get Exhibit 10. Now, Mr. Bond, this is that letter Mr. Rogers sent to you, isn't that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
And that letter hasn't been changed or altered in any way since the last time you saw it?
It looks the same to me.
At this time, defense offers Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay to the entirety of the letter.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, we're not using this document to prove the truth of the matter asserted. In fact, the statements I'm going to use from this document, if I may proffer what it might be,
Certainly.
will be that Miss Lee was going to change her will to include it to Drew Mars. And that fact is actually not in contention today, so I'm not using that to prove the truth of the matter on this document.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, this document is very long and has a lot of statements. It's not just that Ms. Lee was going to change her will. There are statements about Drew Mars, how he was as a caretaker. There are statements about the relationship between Stevie Rogers and Ms. Lee. There are statements about the relationship between Ms. Mars and Ms. Lee. And therefore, it's not just statements that Mr. Cooper is referring to. Now, those statements themselves, though might be on the record, they're still hearsay because these are Ms. Lee's words written at a different time, and they're still using it for the truth of the matter asserted.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, if you would like, I would be more than happy to have this document entered with only the 4th paragraph admitted. In fact, I actually have a zoom in of that paragraph if that's the only part we want to show the jury. And the statements on that paragraph, specifically Miss Lee saying that she was going to change her will, are a statement of intent and are an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033.
May I respond briefly?
Yeah, briefly.
Your Honor, first of all, the first sentence in that paragraph says, because we've become family in name only. That does not fall under 8033. The following sentence is, Drew has been with me for more than a decade, stayed with me through thick and thin, and turned down several offers that would have had paid Drew more money than I do. Now, none of those statements fall under 8033, and they don't go to the fact that Ms. Lee changed her will. Those are still hearsay.
Well, I would let me do this. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to instruct and assume that it was done, that the letter be redacted, all portions of it, except the sentences that say the following. Because we've become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. So just as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew. Everything but those sentences will be redacted and the document will be admitted as such.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, in this letter, Miss Lee said that she was changing her will, right?
Yes, sir. That's an excerpt from her will, but that she does say that in the letter. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Bond. And in the letter, she said she's leaving everything to Mr. Mars, true?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. You can take that off. Now, Mr. Bond, you did track down Miss Lee for Mr. Rogers, right?
That's correct.
And sir, just 5 weeks after you tracked down Miss Lee, she was murdered.
Yes, sir. That's right.
So let's talk about what you know about her death. She was killed with chloroandramine pills, right?
That's right.
Mr. Mars is actually the one who informed you about the chloroandramine allergy, right?
That's right, sir. I was asking Mr. Mars if Miss Lee had any allergies, and he told me that she had an allergy to chloroandramine.
Exactly. He volunteered this information, didn't he?
Right, sir. He answered the question that I asked.
Now, you know that on August the 15th, or August the 14th, Mr. Bond, Mr. Mars actually wasn't the only one in the house with Miss Lee, was he?
That's right. I believe Mr. Rogers had moved back in.
Exactly. And you know that Mr. Rogers was actually alone in the house on August 14th, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of foundation. May I be heard?
You may.
We asked that Mr. Cooper lay foundation as to how Mr. Bond would know this fact, what witnesses he interviewed, how he would know that who was in the house, and who each person was doing in the house. No foundation has been laid for this line of questioning.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
This is cross-examination. If Mr. Bond knows if Mr. Rogers was in the house by himself for any period of time, he's free to answer.
Overruled. When you said this is cross-examination, that was enough. No foundation required on cross-examination. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, you know Mr. Rogers was alone in the house on August 14th.
Yes, sir. That was the account that I was given.
And you know that Miss Lee's pills were on her bedside table, true?
The pill sorter, yes.
They weren't hidden away in a lockbox, were they?
Not when we were there, sir.
Now, you said on direct examination that you found Mr. Mars's fingerprints on that arthritis medication Miss Lee oftentimes took, true?
Yes, sir.
You'd agree that as her caretaker, it was actually Mr. Mars's job to touch this medication, isn't it?
Yes, sir. I believe it was Mr. Mars' job to distribute the medication for each day.
Well, now we've talked about Mr. Mars's behavior on the 15th. I'd like to move on to Mr. Rogers. You spoke with him that day, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Rogers was actually very confident how Miss Lee had died. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, sir. Mr. Rogers believed it was a murder.
And Mr. Rogers actually suggested that you run a toxicology screen on Miss Lee.
Yes, sir.
Now, moving on to that bag you talked about on direct examination. Now, sir, you actually have been into Mr. Mars's room twice, isn't that right?
That's right, sir. Once on my first day at the house, and then once when the police searched it.
And that first date, that was on August 15th, the day after Miss Lee passed away, true?
That's right. I had said I was going to go stretch my legs, and I went to look to see if I could find any evidence that there might be lying out there.
Now, on that time, on August 15th, you didn't find a black bag, did you?
That's right, sir. I wasn't looking in the closet. I spent most of my time with Mr. Mars's computer. That's where I found that email. But you're right, we didn't find the bag then.
So it was only until a week later that those chloroandramine pills were found in Mr. Mars's closet, right?
That's right, sir. We found that bag with the pills when the police searched the room.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. We ask that Mr. Bond be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
And with that, Your Honor, nothing further from the plaintiff. We rest our case and we request a brief 2 to 5 minute break.
How many minutes do we have for a break? Anybody tracking time on this?
I believe all us is in.
There's an hour and 10 minutes until all loss, Your Honor.
Okay, and how long does it take to do each half of the case? And how much time is left for people to do case stuff?
Around 50 minutes to an hour, probably.
Oh, okay. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? All right, is everybody ready?
We are, Your Honor.
So, Judge Orange, may I just interrupt for a moment? I just want to confirm that all of the judges have returned. Judges for the round, if you're back, please turn on your video for a second to confirm that you've returned, or send me a message in chat. Thank you. Mr. Keener, Ms. Hyman, are you back yet? I think I have everyone else. Oh, Jen.
Looks like we're waiting on Mr. Keener.
Correct. All right. Thank you very much, Judge Orange. We are ready to proceed.
Thank you so much. All right, back on the record, do we have some witnesses on behalf of the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Ryan Cabrera to the stand.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Cabrera. You may answer questions. You may ask questions when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Cabrera. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Ryan Cabrera.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Cabrera?
I'm a writer, a biographer.
Have you written anything we might have heard of? Sir? Can you hear me okay? Is the connection all right?
Yeah, the connection is fine. It's just, look, my audience is mostly children. According to the Midlands Middle School Gazette, I have 8 bestsellers.
Could you tell us why you're here?
Yeah, I was working on a biography of Miss Lee. I met with her in the weeks before she died. Her caretaker said that he'd give me some of her books if I came and told you what I knew.
You mentioned that you met with her for several weeks before she passed. What did the two of you talk about?
Her writing, mostly. But we talked about her personal life too, who her friends were, family, stuff like that.
I'd like to take a moment to hear about Stevie Rogers. Do you know who that is?
Yes, sir.
What do you know about Stevie Rogers?
At first, not much. Just that he was her grandson. Anytime I would bring up family, Miss Lee would look away, try and change the subject. The few times that she actually opened up, we mostly talked about money.
Was there anything else Miss Lee would say about Stevie Rogers?
No, not much. No family vacations, no plans for the future, just talked about money.
Now, did you personally meet Stevie Rogers?
Yes, sir, I did. On July 6th, I went to Miss Lee's house and he was there.
Well, did you ask Miss Lee why he was there?
Yes. When we sat down for our interview, I brought him up. I said, you know, Miss Lee, you always talk about Stevie and money. Why is he here?
And what did Miss Lee say?
She told me she was worried that he'd just come back because he'd run out of money.
Now, sir, you also told us that you spoke to Miss Lee on the day that she passed. Can you briefly describe to us how she was behaving that day?
Yes, sir. Less talkative than she normally was. I'd ask a question and she'd mumble maybe a one-word answer. I thought that something was wrong.
Well, did you ask her if anything was wrong?
I did, yeah. I said, you know, Miss Lee, is everything all right? What's wrong?
And what did Miss Lee say?
She kind of looked down for a second, pushed her silverware around, and then she told me she was worried.
Did Miss Lee tell you why she was worried?
Yes. She said that she was worried because Stevie had asked her for something that morning.
Did Miss Lee tell you what she was going to do?
Yes, sir. She said she wasn't going to do it. She wasn't going to give whatever it was to Stevie.
Was that all Miss Lee said on the day that she died?
No, sir. She then asked, she said she was worried. She said she was worried that if she didn't give Stevie what he wanted, Stevie wouldn't let it go.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Your Honor, at this time, I have nothing further.
All right. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Cabrera.
Good morning.
Now, you know that Drew Mars was Agatha Lee's caretaker.
Yes, sir.
He was the only one you had seen who administered medication to Ms. Lee, correct?
Yes, sir.
He was the only one you had ever seen administer medication to Ms. Lee.
Yes, sir. I didn't see that much medication in the house, but from what I did see, Mr. Mars was the only one.
Okay, so let's talk about a specific instance where you saw the defendant giving Ms. Lee some medication. He began explaining what the pill was, right?
Yes, I believe so.
But before he could finish, Ms. Lee stopped him. True?
True.
She didn't ask what the medication was.
Correct. She just said that I'll take whatever you give me.
That's right, sir. We'll get to that. But she didn't ask what the medication was.
No, she didn't.
She didn't ask what the side effects of that medication could be.
No, like I said, just the statement I said earlier.
Exactly, sir. The only thing Ms. Lee said to the defendant was, I will take whatever you hand me. True?
True.
So now let's talk about that lunch conversation you were just telling us about. During this lunch, you were interviewing Ms. Lee, correct?
Yes, for the biography.
You asked her questions.
Of course.
But you wanted to meet again with her, right?
Yeah, I always wanted to meet with her. The biography wasn't even close to done, so I needed to meet with her.
That's right, sir. So you suggested meeting that Friday.
I did.
But Ms. Lee said she had an appointment, or she was planning to meet with someone else on that Friday, correct?
Yes, she said she was planning a meeting for Friday.
She said she was planning meeting with her attorney, true?
That's true. I wasn't sure what they were going to talk about.
Also, just to be clear, the day that Ms. Lee died, she told you she was planning on meeting with her attorney.
Yes, the day that she died, she said they would meet on the Friday, a few days later.
So now I want to talk about why you're here in court testifying. In June of 2020, Drew Mars, the defendant, called you on the phone, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, at this point, you know the defendant was already being sued.
Yes, sir.
And so he asked you to come testify.
Yes, he said, hey, can you come testify? Just tell us what you know. And I said, yes, sir, I will.
And we can agree that at the end of today's trial, there's potentially a big payoff for you, isn't there?
What do you mean, sir?
Well, during that conversation, the defendant asked you what you would like to have from Ms. Lee's estate.
Yeah, I told him I'd love the books in her book collection. She was a great author.
That's right. You know that she had a dozen unpublished books in her study.
Yes, sir.
As far as you know, you're one of the few people who is aware of this book collection.
Well, I guess everyone is now, but yeah, at the time I was the only one.
And sir, when the defendant asked you what you would like to have, you said you want that unpublished book collection.
Yeah, I haven't actually gotten to see them, so I'd love to read them.
That's right, sir. The only way you get to read those books from that unpublished book collection is if the defendant wins today's trial.
Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope of this witness's knowledge, may I be heard?
You may.
This witness does not know the legal implications of what happens if Drew Mars wins or Stevie Rogers wins this trial. This witness is not a legal expert. He doesn't know who wins what. And therefore, to ask this witness what he would win dependent on the outcome of this trial goes beyond this witness's expertise. He hasn't gone to law school. He doesn't know the law in this case. There's been no foundation laid for this witness to accurately tell us what he would and would not gain depending on the outcome of this legal trial.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Mr. Cabrera has gone at length discussing the wills of Ms. Lee, both the past and the current versions, and who would win what from each will. Now, these book collections, part of the estate that he is aware of, I'm only asking him about what he knows, not asking for a legal conclusion here.
Response to that, Your Honor?
Before I get the response, do I have it right that the question pending is the only way he would get to read the books is if, what do you call it? The
defendant.
Case? Is that the question that's pending?
Yes, Your Honor.
Phrased like that?
I could rephrase it to ask about his knowledge.
Well, if you rephrase it, that's where I was going. So thank you for getting there. So I'm going to overrule the objection with the understanding that plaintiff's counsel is going to rephrase the question so that it pertains to what this witness understands to be the case about his opportunity to read the books.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
So, Mr. Cabrera, to your knowledge, as it stands now, the only way you get to read these books is if Drew Mars, the defendant, wins today's trial.
Drew said that if he wins, that I could
Your
have-
Honor, I re-raised my objection. This witness didn't ask specifically to this witness's knowledge. He asked if Drew Mars win this case, he gets to read the books. He didn't ask about this witness's knowledge, this witness's understanding. It's still asking for a legal conclusion that this witness has no knowledge about.
Your Honor, I believe my first three words were "to your knowledge."
Yeah, I thought those were your first three words too. So I'm gonna overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Cabrera, I'll ask again, to your knowledge, as it stands now, the only way you get to read any of these books is if Drew Mars, the defendant, wins today's trial.
You see, sir, I don't know if it's as simple as that. Mr. Mars was the only one who told me I could. If the outcome went in a different way, I might ask Mr. Rogers as well if I could read them, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, Mr. Cabrera, as it stands now, the defendant is the only one who promised you those books.
Yes, sir.
And now you're here testifying on behalf of the defendant.
I'm just here to tell you what I know.
You're testifying for the defense?
That's who I was called by, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Nothing further at this point, Your Honor.
All right.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Yes, redirect, please.
Sir, is there anything that Drew Mars told you that affects your testimony in any way?
No, sir. He actually asked me to testify, and I agreed before even talking about the books. I was going to testify to tell you what I know, regardless of the books.
Your Honor, I have nothing further. Barring any recross, I ask this witness be excused.
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Please have a wonderful day. Any further witnesses for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense calls Drew Mars.
All right. Mr. Mars, please assume that you're on the stand somewhere and you've been duly sworn. Counsel, please feel free to question whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hi, good morning. My name's Drew Mars.
Mr. Mars, I know we've heard a lot about you in today's case, but could you just tell us why you're here today?
Yeah, I was Miss Lee's caretaker. When she passed, Mr. Rogers, he sued me for her estate, saying that I killed her.
Did you?
No, sir. I had nothing to do with Miss Lee's death.
How did you meet Miss Lee?
Well, back in 2008, I applied for a job with a temp agency. You know, they sent me to a caretaking agency, one of those, things where you look after old people. I remember I was cleaning the living room and I broke a lamp. I thought I was going to be fired, but Miss Lee just started laughing and said she hated that thing. I don't know. I guess something clicked because she hired me full time.
What did that job entail?
I lived in the house. I cooked and cleaned, made sure everything, was in good shape. I was kind of like a personal assistant.
What was your relationship like with Miss Lee?
I mean, we were very close. We lived together for 10 years, every meal, every movie, just looking after each other, she was, kind of like a second mother to me, sir.
Sir, I want to start by asking you about Miss Lee's death. When did you know she had died?
I didn't know until the day after, August 15th.
How'd you find out?
Well, I went up to her room with coffee and a bowl of cereal. That was her breakfast. And when I knocked, she didn't answer. So I went in and I found her there, sir.
What did you do?
I tried to wake her up. I thought she was just sleeping. But when I touched her, she was bone cold, sir. So I went to Stevie and we called the police.
What did the police do when they arrived?
They searched the house, talked to us. They found that Ms. Lee had died from an allergic reaction to chloroandramine, some heartburn medication.
Earlier today, we heard that your fingerprints were on some of Miss Lee's medication. Do you know why?
I did Ms. Lee's pill organizer for the week. That plastic thing with all the days lettered on it. I pour them into my hand and then put the extras back in. So I might have touched a couple in that bottle.
We've also heard about a black bag. Had you ever seen that bag before?
No, sir. I've never seen it.
Do you know why your fingerprints were on the zipper?
I can't say for sure. I pack Miss Lee's lunches in bags that look sort of like that when we're out on the road. So I don't know. They all look like this one.
Did anyone else have access to your room during that entire week?
Well, it was me and Mr. Rogers at the house, so us too.
Mr. Mars, I'd like to ask you some questions about the day Miss Lee died, August.
Okay.
Were you home that whole day?
No, sir. Ms. Lee had a meeting, so I drove her to it and then waited until she was finished.
When you and Miss Lee left for that meeting, to your knowledge, was there anyone else in the house?
No, sir. Just Mr. Rogers.
How long was it until you saw Mr. Rogers again?
It was, until we got back, so he was there for maybe 2.5 hours.
Before you
Objection,
left.
Your Honor, to lack of foundation. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, it's within the witness's perception to say that Mr. Rogers was in the house when Mr. Mars left. It's within the witness's perception to say that Mr. Rogers was in the house when the witness came back. It's not within the witness's perception to say that Mr. Rogers was in the house for 2.5 hours.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No.
My question was, when was the last time you saw Mr. Rogers? And he said 2.5 hours later.
I think I heard it the way plaintiff's counsel heard it. Was there some testimony as to whether or not Mr. Mars was there when the other person arrived, such that he could fix the duration of time that the other person was there, or no? No.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Could you specify what you're asking about?
Well, what I'm asking about is there some foundation that Mr. Mars was there when the other person first got there? Otherwise, he can't testify how long the person was there.
Oh, Your Honor, if you'd like, I can ask Mr. Mars if he saw Mr. Rogers that morning before they left.
Okay, then I'm going to sustain the objection. Lay the foundation.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Mars, before you and Miss Lee had left for that meeting, did you ever see Mr. Rogers in the house?
Yeah, Stevie was just hanging out in the house when we left.
And when was the next time that you saw Mr. Rogers?
Well, I drove her to the meeting, and then we came back maybe 2.5 hours later, so 12:30 or so.
Now, before you left, did you lock the door to your room?
I don't have a lock, sir.
Did you lock the door to your closet?
No, sir.
What about the door to Miss Lee's room?
No, that door was unlocked too.
Mr. Mars, was any part of that house locked?
No, we didn't even leave the front door locked if Mr. Rogers was there.
I want to talk a bit about Mr. Rogers now. You said that it was just you and Miss Lee until 2018. When did that change?
July. That's when Stevie came a few weeks before she died.
Before that July, are you aware of any communication from Mr. Rogers to Miss Lee?
Not for years, sir. I mean, I handled the mail. I didn't see any letters, anything like that.
Did you ever talk with Miss Lee about her grandchild?
We did once that February.
What did she say?
She told me she was planning on taking Mr. Rogers out of her will.
You know if she did?
Yeah, she showed me the new will. She changed it over from Stevie to me.
During the 5 weeks Mr. Rogers was at the Lee Manor before Miss Lee died, did you ever hear him talk about it?
I did, sir.
I want to go over exactly what you heard. Where did you hear them speaking?
They were talking in the study. I come up to bring some afternoon tea, and I was waiting in the sitting room.
What did you hear?
Stevie said, I know you cut me out of the will, and he said he wanted her to change it.
How did Miss Lee respond?
She told him no, plain and simple. She said she didn't like what the money had done to him and wanted to see him stand on his own 2 feet.
Mr. Mars, when exactly did that conversation take place?
August 14th, sir. The day she died.
Thank you, Mr. Mars. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Mandani, can we get Exhibit 17 on the screen? It's already in evidence. Mr. Mandani?
My apologies. Having some technical difficulties. I can pull it up right now.
It's okay. If I were doing it, it would take much longer, so it's fine.
Permission to proceed?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Mars, I want to start by talking about some pills.
Okay.
What you see in front of you, that's a bottle of chloroandramine, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you knew the whole time you were working for Miss Lee that she's allergic to chloroandramine, didn't you?
I did.
In fact, you knew she was so allergic that just one pill could cause her to have a heart attack, didn't you?
Yeah, that's actually when she hired me in the first place. She'd had a heart attack from that.
She hired you, sir, because she needed so much help after that heart attack that you had to come to her house and be her in-home aide. Is that right?
Well, she was a strong woman, man. I mean, she didn't need help, getting around, but she just wanted to be sure that someone was there to catch her if anything happened.
She hired you after she had that heart attack to be her aide?
Yes, ma'am. There was another gentleman too who was working for her also.
All right, now I want to talk about a different set of pills. You know that Miss Lee took arthritis medication every night, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk about how that arthritis medication and chloroandramine compare.
Okay.
So those pills are both purple, right?
Yes.
They're the same size.
Yes.
They're the same shape.
Yes.
They're both odorless. They don't smell like anything.
No, normal pills.
So you would say that chloroandramine and that arthritis medication are identical, right?
Yes.
And you also know that Miss Lee took 2 of those arthritis pills every night, don't you?
Yeah, she took 2 Winterin, 1 Advil, and then some heartburn medication.
I want to talk a little more about chloroandramine. You know that chloroandramine is an easily accessible over-the-counter drug, right?
Yeah, you can get it at any pharmacy. It's not dangerous to most people.
But you know it was dangerous to Miss Lee, right?
Yes, we were very careful about that.
And you said you know you could find it at the pharmacy. Mr. Mars, the day before Miss Lee died, you went to the pharmacy, didn't you?
I went to a CVS, while she was at her meeting.
And you don't have a receipt from that CVS run, do you?
No, I just got a Dr. Pepper, so. I didn't keep it or anything.
I understand you're saying you got a Dr. Pepper, but you don't have a receipt. You also don't have a credit card statement from that CVS run, do you?
No, I used a $5.
So you have no way of showing what you bought that day at the pharmacy.
I mean, if you find like some security footage, something like that, I mean, you could see it that way, but I don't have anything with me.
But you know, Mr. Mars, that a bag with chloroandramine inside of it was found in your closet, don't you?
Yes, ma'am. That's what they told me.
And they also told you that your fingerprint was found on that bag, right?
Yep, that's right.
Now, Mr. Mars, I want to talk about the payoff you received from Miss Lee's death. Before Miss Lee died, you had about $20,000 in savings, right?
Something like that, yeah.
And you know that in cash alone, Miss Lee was worth $20 million, don't you?
Yes, ma'am.
And before February of 2018, you believed that when she died, that money would go to her grandson, right?
Before February, yeah.
But then in February, she told you that money was going to go to you.
Yeah, she changed her will.
I want to talk about what you did when you found that out. Mr. Mundani, can we get Exhibit 13 on the screen? You wrote an email, right?
Yes.
You wrote this email February 1st of 2018.
That's when she told me.
And in this email, Mr. Mars, you say, I get everything. The house, the money, everything. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, you did.
You say, we're talking millions of dollars?
Yeah, I never had anything close to that in my life.
And you say, Mr. Mars, this is going to totally change my life, right?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
And you knew, didn't you, that because you were getting all of this money, that meant that Stevie Rogers wasn't, right?
Yeah. Well, she said she was taking Stevie out. I mean, I'm sure she could have done something where she had both of us in there, but that didn't seem like the route she was going.
But you actually knew that Stevie Rogers wouldn't get any of that money, right?
That's what she told me. Yes, ma'am.
A few months later, Mr. Rogers showed up at Miss Lee's house, right?
Yeah, on July 4th.
You noticed that at that point, the two of them were spending a lot of time together?
Yes, they were very, very close to me.
You noticed that they were getting close to one another?
Yes, ma'am.
You actually overheard them having a conversation about Miss Lee's will, right?
Yeah, like I talked about on August 14th.
That conversation was about changing Miss Lee's will?
Or whether or not she was going to do it, yeah.
All right. Well, there's been some discrepancy between what you and what Mr. Rogers have said, so I want to bring something else up. You have not always been entirely truthful about your understanding of Miss Lee's will, have you?
Well, when they did the will reading, yeah.
I want to talk about what happened at that will reading.
Of course,
So,
ma'am.
at that point, that was several months after you learned that your name was written into Miss Lee's will.
Yes, ma'am.
A lawyer announced at this will reading that you would be receiving Miss Lee's estate, right?
Yes, ma'am.
At that point, Mr. Mars, you said, I had no idea, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am. I was scared.
You said that you didn't know you were going to be getting Miss Lee's money, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Mr. Mars, that wasn't the truth, was it?
She had told me, ma'am. You're right.
I want to talk about why you lied on that occasion. Mr. Mars, you lied because you didn't want the police to think you had motive. Is that right?
I don't know. I was just scared, ma'am, because Stevie kept saying that I had done it.
Is it your testimony today, Mr. Mars, that is not why you lied to the police?
No, I mean, that is, I thought that if they knew I knew, then they'd send me to jail or something like that.
So, Mr. Mars, you lied to the police because you didn't want them to think you had killed Miss Lee, right?
Well, yes, ma'am, that's right.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Mr. Mars, opposing counsel mentioned on cross-examination a black bag. Could you please explain why your fingerprint could have gotten there?
Again, sir, I don't know for sure, but I do pack Miss Lee's lunches when we're out on the road in bags kind of like that. So it could have been that.
And at the will reading, why would you act surprised at the fact that you were to receive the estate?
Of course, sir. Well, you know, Stevie had been pointing a finger at me ever since the beginning, and I didn't know what to do. I was scared, and I just said I didn't know, but I shouldn't have done that, sir. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mars. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right. Anything further from the plaintiff, or may this witness be excused?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mars.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests its case in chief.
Okay. So before we go into closings, how much time do we have left? What are we looking like as far as all loss? I'm kind of off because I'm in a different time zone, obviously, from whenever the all loss time is. And I'd be off even if I were in the same time zone, knowing me. So how much time do we have left? And how much time do we have with stuff to do?
Around 20 minutes of closings, I would say. And
that includes both sides?
yes,
Okay. And then how much time do we have before all loss?
I'm not sure. All loss is in a different time zone than me, and I'm not
We
sure
have-
what time zone's in.
We have 33 minutes, Your Honor.
Okay. So we have a 13-minute cushion. Let's call it a 10-minute cushion. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Is that okay with everybody?
That's okay with us, but we're also willing to move to closings or take a shorter break also, if that's all right with defense counsel.
Yeah, it's fine if we take a shorter break or move right on. I just want to make sure that the jury members have the opportunity to give their ballot in time.
Okay. I think we'll have enough of a cushion to do that. Why don't we go on and take a 9-minute break? Okay. You guys con me out of one of my minutes. I'm trying to take a longer break, actually. But 9 minutes. So let's all be back. I have 10:33. Let's be back at let's do 8 minutes. 10:41 by my
Yes.
clock. Okay, is that cool?
Yes,
sir.
Your Honor.
Your
All
Honor.
right, thank you, everybody.
Hi, judges. I just want to make sure everyone is back. So if you're back, please turn your video feed on for a moment or send me a message in chat. John. Content in here. Thank you very much, Judge Orange. We are ready to proceed.
Okay, back on the record. Are the parties all present and ready to proceed with closing arguments? Plaintiff, you'll be going first.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You can start when you're ready.
Certainly. Your Honor, Mr. Cooper, and may it please the court. I had no idea. I had no idea. That's what the defendant said on August 20th of 2018, when he was told that he would receive all of Agatha Lee's estate. Members of the jury, we know that that wasn't true. We know that the defendant lied, and it wouldn't be the first lie in today's case. Because you saw this email. February 1st, 2018. I get everything. The house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life. And today you heard why he lied. Because just a few minutes ago, my co-counsel, Ms. Goldberg, asked the defendant why he had done that. And he had to admit, he lied to the police because he didn't want them to think that he had killed Agatha Lee. But today that lie wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to hide what he had done, because we showed you the pills, the prints, and the payoff. And that's why we're in court today. Because you see, in Midlands, if you kill someone, you can't inherit any of their money. And that's why Mr. Rogers is suing the defendant. So the defendant doesn't profit from this crime. And as Ms. Goldberg explained at the beginning of today's trial, we had the burden to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not, that Drew Mars knowingly or intentionally killed Agatha Lee. And we've met that burden by showing you the pills, the prints, and the payoff. So let's start by talking about those pills, because they are the murder weapon in today's case. And you saw this pill bottle today that contains a pill called chloroandromine. And the defendant knew that just 2 pills of chloroandromine could kill Ms. Lee. Now, there's another medication, another drug that looks exactly like chloroandromine, same color, same shape, same size, and that drug is Ms. Lee's arthritis medication. And the defendant knew that too. He knew if he switched those pills, Ms. Lee would have no idea. Because you heard from the defense's own witness, Ryan Cabrera, that when the defendant administered medication to Ms. Lee said, "You can hand me whatever you want, I will take it." She didn't ask what the medication was. She didn't ask what the side effects would be. She completely trusted the defendant. The defendant knew that, and he took advantage of it. He switched those pills. He took out 2 pills of chloroandromine from the bag inside of his closet, put it in Ms. Lee's pill sorter, took out the 2 arthritis medication pills that were supposed to be in the pill sorter, and placed them back in their original bottle. You heard today that on the night she died, Ms. Lee never took her arthritis medication like she was supposed to. Instead, she took those 2 pills of chloroandromine. But how do we know that it was the defendant who placed those pills there? Well, that brings us to the prints. You see, there were two key locations where the defendant's fingerprints were found. First, on Ms. Lee's arthritis medication. And now, when police searched this bottle, they didn't find a random number of fingerprints. No, they found exactly 2 pills that have fingerprints on them. The 2 pills that would have to be removed from Ms. Liz's pill sorter. And those fingerprints belong to the defendant. So we know it was the defendant who removed the arthritis medication. Now, the second place where they found fingerprints was on a bag inside of the defendant's closet. And members of the jury, the defendant today on the stand claimed that he has no idea how this bag got there. And first he said he's never seen it, and then he says he packed lunches in it, so which is it? Because you and I know the answer. His fingerprint was on that zipper. He opened that bag to take out the chloroangimin pills from inside of it. And what these 2 sets of fingerprints tell you is very simple. The defendant opens that bag, takes out the chloroangimin pill, switches it for Ms. Lee's arthritis medication, and to make sure Ms. Lee doesn't notice, removes the arthritis medication and places it back in its original bottle. But why? Well, that brings us to the payoff. Because the defendant told you on the stand that he was aware he would receive all of Ms. Lee's money, all $20 million of it. You see, in February of 2018, Ms. Lee changed her will to make Drew Mars the sole heir of her fortune. But not for long. Because on August 14th of 2018, the night before Ms. Lee is poisoned, she has a conversation with her grandson, Stevie Rogers, and tells him, "I'm going to give you everything." And she even makes a plan to meet with her attorney 4 days later. And you heard that from both defense witnesses. I mean, members of the jury, the only reason Ms. Lee would be planning to meet with her attorney that soon after that conversation is if she were going to change her will. And the defendant knew that. He was at the door listening. He knew he had just 4 days to do something. He knew he had just 4 days to make sure Ms. Lee never went through with that plan, never changed her will. And so that night, the defendant is seen sneaking into Ms. Lee's room with something in his hand and switches those medications. And just a week later, all $20 million are his. The pills, the prints, and the payoff. So now I want to talk about what the defense has asked you to believe throughout today's trial. They want you to believe that Stevie Rogers killed his own grandmother for money. And I want you to think about what that means. Because sure, we can fight about who was going to get Ms. Lee's will if she were allowed to live a little longer. But both parties agree that Ms. Lee's final will left everything to Drew Mars and nothing to Stevie Rogers. And both parties agree that Stevie Rogers knew that. So they're asking you to believe that instead of spending a little more time with his grandmother, trying to get into her good books, trying to get her to change her will, Stevie Rogers decided to kill his grandmother. They want you to believe that before trying any other option, Stevie Rogers' first plan was to murder his grandmother, hope he doesn't get caught, hope he can frame Drew Mars, and then bet all his life that he can win this trial. Members of the jury, that makes no sense. And it certainly is not supported by any evidence you've heard. But there is one thing the plaintiff said in their opening statement. Mr. Garcia said that the killer in today's case was running out of money and running out of time, and I agree. But that killer wasn't Stevie Rogers. Stevie Rogers had all the time in the world. Drew Mars was the one who was about to lose his inheritance. Drew Mars was the one who had just 4 days to do something about that. And members of the jury, when you look at the pills, the prints, and the payoff, it becomes clear that it was Drew Mars who killed Agatha Lee. Don't let him reap the spoils too. find in favor of Stevie Rogers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Can we have the closing for the defense, please?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. He knew what the will said, and he knew how to stop it. We're here today because Stephen Rogers wants you to believe that Drew Mars murdered Agatha Lee. You might be asking yourself, why are we here in a civil court? Why is someone being sued when a woman is dead? I've asked myself these same questions, and unfortunately, members of the jury, the reason Mr. Rogers has brought us here today because of one thing: money. And in Mr. Rogers' pursuit of money, he tried to show you that there's only one person that could have been responsible for murdering Agatha Lee. It couldn't have been that multiple people had access to the murder weapon, chloroandramine. It couldn't have been that multiple people had access to Agatha Lee's pill container. It couldn't have been that Stevie Rogers had a plan to frame Mr. Mars. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, you've heard all these things to be true. And now, what you're left with is exactly the same thing my co-counsel told you in his opening statement when describing Stephen Rogers. He knew what the will said, and he knew how to stop it. Members of the jury, I'd like to spend our time together by first explaining to you what the law is in today's case. Then we'll go over the evidence you heard today. And then finally, we'll talk about how what we've shown proves that this case for Stevie Rogers has nothing to do with justice, but everything to do with money. Now, the law governing today's case is called the Slayer Statute. What it tells us is that an individual cannot receive any of the estate from a person who they have murdered. What the plaintiff has to show is that Mr. Mars purposefully or knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee. They have to prove that to you beyond a preponderance of the evidence. That means you have to be convinced it was more likely Mr. Mars killed Agatha Lee over any other explanation. What the statute also tells us is that if the plaintiff meets their burden, Miss Lee's entire estate goes to Stevie Rogers. Plaintiff has failed to meet that burden. So let's talk about what you heard today. First, Mr. Rogers knew what the will said. Today, Mr. Rogers came in court before you. Today, he spoke highly of his grandmother, like they had this great relationship. But back in 2018, that was whenever he reached out to her for the first time in years. In talking about that will, members of the jury, Mr. Rogers knew what it said. He knew that none of Miss Lee's estate was going to be left to him whenever she died. In fact, whenever he had hired his own private investigator to get back into Miss Lee's will, to contact her again, he reached out to a private investigator and sent that letter we talked about earlier today. Now, it's interesting, members of the jury, this time that Mr. Rogers reached out to that private investigator also just so happened to be the time that Mr. Rogers' trust fund was running out. You heard today that he had not spoken to his grandmother in over 7 years. But whenever that trust fund starts to run out in the month of July, he needs a reason to get some money again. And earlier in February, he had already known he was taking out the will, but he knew how to stop it. And in knowing how to stop it, we heard today that Mr. Rogers is knowledgeable of the Slayer Statute. On cross-examination, my co-counsel, Mr. Raul Garcia, brought up that he went to law school. He was knowledgeable of the fact that if somehow Mr. Mars could get blamed for a murder, he wouldn't be able to receive any of that estate. And as Miss Lee's grandchild, the next person in line to receive all that money will be Mr. Rogers. Now, also in showing that Mr. Rogers knew how to stop this will from happening, plaintiff counsel brought before you today a private investigator, Mr. Bond. They showed you some forensic evidence that he collected that they claim locks Drew Mars down to the scene. And I want to talk about that because we learned that while Drew Mars had access to the pills, Mr. Bond told us that Mr. Rogers did as well. Told you that Drew Mars knew about this fatal allergy. So did Mr. Rogers. Told you that Drew Mars lied and knew what was on the will. Mr. Rogers knew was on the will too. He brought you today a black bag, that black bag that he found the chloroandramine in. And remember on cross-examination, I asked Mr. Bond how many times he had searched Mr. Mars's room. He did so twice. Once on August 15th, the day after Miss Lee was found dead. Once on August 21st, an entire week later. You'll recall that on August 15th, Mr. Bond found no bag in Mr. Mars's room. He found no chloroandramine in Mr. Mars's room. And plaintiff counsel might come up here and tell you, well, that's because he wasn't searching that hard in Mr. Mars's room on August 15th. Remember that first time he searched the room, he opened up Mr. Mars's computer. He accessed his things on the computer through password protection. He even found an email that he liked, that email that he presented to you in court today. He searched the room so thoroughly that he could access and look through his computer, but he didn't find any bag. But on August 21st, a week after the murder had taken place, somehow they find a chloroandramine. They find a murder weapon. They want you to believe that it makes sense that Mr. Mars, if he had committed this crime, would hold on to the murder weapon throughout that entire week. That just doesn't make sense. Now, we also called to the stand Mr. Cabrera today. He told you about a conversation that Agatha Lee had with Mr. Rogers earlier that morning. And that Miss Lee told him, Stevie asked me for something this morning. I had to tell him no. I won't give him what he wanted. I'm afraid he won't forgive me. He knew what the will said. He knew how to stop it. Now, members of the jury, today, the plaintiff's case leaves us with too many questions and not enough answers. Think about all the things you didn't hear about in today's case. We didn't see any evidence conclusively linking Drew Mars to any chloroandramine. Why didn't we have any fingerprints on the chloroandramine bottle? Why didn't we have any video evidence of him purchasing any chloroandramine? The only people telling you that Drew Mars purchased chloroandramine is plaintiff counsel. There aren't any receipts. There isn't any witness that could tell you what he bought that day. Now, members of the jury, the answers to these questions, I don't know. They don't know. And now, you don't know. Today, the plaintiff was charged with proving to you that Mr. Mars killed Agatha Lee. They had to show you that he did so knowingly or purposefully. They've instead shown you that Stevie Rogers knew what was in the will and that he knew how to stop it. The plaintiff thinks it's okay to take away an inheritance away from a rightful recipient just because he was Miss Lee's caretaker because of the evidence they brought you today? That's not reasonable. They want to turn a murderer into a millionaire. And members of the jury, that's not justice in this country. That's not justice in this state. That's not justice in this courtroom. Members of the jury, the ultimate responsibility for what happens in today's case doesn't rest with me. It doesn't rest with the plaintiff either. It rests with you. Now, the time to do justice in the form of putting someone behind bars for the murder of Agatha Lee is already past us, unfortunately. But each and every one of you have the unique opportunity to carry out justice in your own way. And that's by making sure Agatha Lee's final wishes don't go unanswered. It isn't all about the money like the plaintiff would have you believe. It's about maintaining the dignity of a slain woman's final will and testament. I ask you to do justice today. Find Drew Mars not liable. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, defense counsel. Do we have a rebuttal from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may start when ready.
Now, Mr. Cooper just said that Stevie Rogers knew what the will said and knew how to stop it. But the facts we showed you today show that it was Drew Mars who knew what the will would have said, and he was the one who knew how to stop it. Because what the defense is claiming today is that it was Stevie Rogers, not Drew Mars, who switched those pills. But in order for that to be true, Stevie Rogers would have to have not just knowledge that Ms. Lee was allergic to chloroangiamine, but that what the chloroangiamine pills looked like, what the arthritis medication looked like, and that he knew that they were identical. And that's just not the case. The only person who knew that these pills were identical was Drew Mars, the defendant. So when you're looking at the pills, the prints left behind and the payoff that Drew Mars would get from acting quickly, it becomes clear that it was Drew Mars and not Stevie Rogers who poisoned Agatha Lee. Find in favor of Stevie Rogers. Thank you.
All right. That concludes the presentation of the evidence and the argument in this case. And the court will take it under submission and the jury will deliberate. And at some point, we'll have a decision on it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to stop the live stream now. I'm going to put the teams back into their breakout rooms while